Hi everyone, how are you doing? Thanks for joining the session tonight. I'm Chris Futcher from Cavendish Wood. Just a little bit about the organisation before we start. So Cavendish Wood are a full life cycle digital transformation company. We help organisations, both public and private sectors, to define digital strategy, implement methodology, culture change, and innovation. We also design and deliver enterprise solutions, including physical and cloud infrastructure, application development, and systems integration. So as you probably guess, we're strong advocates for utilising technology to solve business problems and create meaningful transformation within the enterprise. Today's topic, as I'm sure you already know, is the new Bot Framework SDK for Microsoft.NET. Today's presenters are David Olaniyan and Dan Harris from our solutions engineering team. Dan is part of our senior management team and has been with the organisation for about 6 years now, so he's more or less part of the furniture. And David's a senior solutions developer and is currently working on our Department of Work and Pensions account team, developing a large identity solution, which we're currently engaged to deliver for them. Both of them are senior technologists for Cavendish Wood, are responsible for the delivery of innovation to all of our clients. So taking in-depth interest in all emerging technology, most of which hopefully we'll cover over the next few months in our Tech Talk sessions. So going on to today's presentation, some of the things they're going to be covering is a comparison of all the available bot frameworks around today, so costs, features, that kind of thing. An overview of key components of bot framework, or of a bot framework. We're going to show the setup of a simple echobot and what's required to create it. And then we're going to demo another simple bot and how to tweak the code for different outputs. We're recording the webinar, so as soon as we're done, we'll make it available. And I'll share a link to you. That may be YouTube or on the website. So please feel free to share with anybody you know who might be interested. We're keeping the chat window open for everyone, so it'll be a public chat. So by all means, send any questions or comments. If you want to get my attention, just use the @ sign to get my attention. I'll do my best to pass your questions to David and Dan during the session. If it's quite a complex question, maybe we'll leave those till after, but if it's a quick question to answer, I'll pass them on. We'll probably be running a couple of polls during the session. They'll pop up on the right-hand side of your screen as soon as I've put them up, so give us your feedback there as well. So just be questions around what you're thinking of bots, what your organisation may be looking to do with bots. And lastly, just send us your feedback. We want to make the sessions useful for everybody. So if something doesn't hit the spot, let me know. We'll endeavour to try and improve for the next one. And likewise, if you have some positive feedback, we'd love to hear that too. So just before I hand over to David to start the session, I wanted to ask you to think about potential use cases in your organisations as we go through the presentation. We're starting to see more internal enterprise use cases as well as customer-facing solutions. So just to wet your whistle, I'm now going to play you a short video of an enterprise bot, which was way ahead of its time.
Hello, IT. Something's wrong with my computer. Have you tried turning it off and on again? You're welcome, mate. Hello, IT.
Try turning it off and on again and nothing happens.
Is it definitely plugged in?
Thanks very much.
You're welcome, mate.
All right, great use case for a bot there. So without further ado from me and waffle, I'm going to hand over to David to start the presentation. Thanks very much. David, over to you.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Chris. And let's get straight to the presentation for today. And like Chris has mentioned early on, we're basically going to cover an introduction to bots, give us an overview of what bots are and how they can be useful to organizations. And also we're then going to focus on the Microsoft Bot Framework, which is the solution developed by Microsoft. So as we go on, the first question that we need to address is what a bot is. And many years ago, each time I hear the word bot, the first thing that comes to my mind is some automated response from a website where I'm trying to get in touch with a customer agent and I'm redirected to some automated response, which sometimes gets me frustrated. But bots are, way beyond this. As a developer, there's a lot more that can be achieved with bots. And from being able to get some personalized information to accessing different types of data, bots can be really useful. And I think over the course of this presentation, you get to understand a little more of what bots are. And I mean, the simplest definition is basically to define bot as a software application which can run autonomous, which can run operations autonomously. And basically, you can communicate with it, and then it can communicate back with you as a user. So going forward, we want to compare the different bot frameworks we have. We definitely have dozens of bots. And bot SDKs, which are developed by, different companies, from the leading tech giants to, some open source, projects. So in this case, we've only highlighted like a few of them. And we have like Amazon Lex, which is built on the same framework that supports Alexa, which we are all familiar with. So a lot of these companies have been using some of these technologies in-house, but have currently made it easy for developers to build custom solutions using these frameworks. And for the purpose of this presentation, we'll focus on the Microsoft Bot Framework, which has more focus on enterprise because Microsoft has a lot more strength in that. And we have like a free pricing tier, so it's easy for developers to pick this up and learn without having to incur any significant cost. And then we have like support for Node.js and the C#.NET programming language. So yeah, as we move on, I would hand over to Dan, who is going to walk us through some of the different components that make up the services that power the Microsoft Bot Framework. So Dan, take it.
Thanks, David. So as David was saying, these are basically the components that would make up a typical bot framework bot. We're talking in the context of the Microsoft framework here, but many of the concepts would apply to some of the other frameworks that David had up on the screen before. They may have different names, similar to how Azure and AWS have similar services with different names against them. So to jump right into this, the first thing we want to talk about are the inputs on the left-hand side. So this is one of the things that makes bots really versatile, inclusive, and accessible. It's that wide range of input methods that they support. When developed correctly, it should be possible for anybody to use your bot effectively. This sort of wide range of inputs allows a user to interact in the way they prefer based on their current situation. It can also vary, person to person, across regions or age groups. Everyone has a preference for how they like to interact with technology. Some people are still quite shy about talking to the phone, especially in public, so they'd probably opt for the typing option at that point. And obviously, to initiate any of those inputs, you obviously need a device to accept that input. So this device wheel on the bottom shows just some of the devices that you might interact with a bot from. You can see most of these are devices that a user would interact with, but it's probably important to point out as well that these don't have to be devices with a user input. They could be an IoT device sending data from a sensor taking in info from the real world. One example which I think is quite interesting on this slide is the car. So a lot of car manufacturers are starting to put a bot at the heart of their sort of infotainment system, the system that gives them info about the car. So highly specialized systems that can give you alerts at the appropriate time, and even just simple things like navigate your music. By building their own bot, they can really customize it to their specific vehicle.
Yeah, and I think one of the exciting things about that is also how it makes it easy to build applications that are accessible. So it's easy to build like a bridge between people who may be able to type and view on the screen and people who may not be able to do this and would need some kind of audio interface to connect with.
Yeah, and you definitely need to sort of, you wouldn't implement every input with every device. So in a car, typing is quite cumbersome. It can be dangerous. So, voice and adaptive cards and touch, they're really suitable for a car. A phone, you're probably going to implement most of these inputs to get the best user experience. So just moving on to channels, which is on the top of this slide on the left. The bot framework supports a wide number of channels, and a channel is basically a location where you may interact with a bot from. Some of the common channels that you can see there, things that a lot of us we use every day, include those messaging platforms such as Skype, Teams, Slack, You can also include more traditional technology such as SMS. That might sound a bit low tech to people, but SMS could be useful if you want your bot to work in emerging markets, or you expect it to be used in areas with a poor data signal, which still does exist in a lot of parts of the world at the moment. So the bot framework makes it really easy to integrate with all these different channels, multiple channels at once, with very little effort and maximum reuse of your code. So you can build this bot once and then get maximum reach by deploying across all the relevant channels that the framework supports. There are two types of channels that Microsoft have. So there are standard and premium. In the free tier, you can actually send unlimited messages to the standard channels. You might be surprised to learn that most channels actually do come under that standard tier, including Teams, Slack, and Facebook Messenger. So you can really do quite a lot with this framework for very little cost. So I'll just move on now to the cognitive services in the middle. This is really where bots get a little bit more interesting, because these services are what give the bot its intelligence, its ability to interact in a natural, almost human-like way. What I personally think is really great about these cognitive services built on Azure is they really do democratize AI and machine learning, and they allow all developers to build intelligence into their applications and their bots. Previously, it could take years to develop these technologies in-house, and now they're at the end of a simple API call for absolutely anybody to use. From it could be a hobbyist learning in the spare time, right up to enterprise who don't want to invest in building their own internal AI and machine learning platforms. The language understanding service, which you can see at the bottom of that wheel, this is really important. It's what allows the bot to interpret natural language input and then determine the specific intent of the user. So to give you a really basic example, if I was to say, ping a text over to David, that means the same thing as send David an SMS. The language understanding service take both of those inputs and turn them into what you could consider a strongly typed action or intent that the bot can understand, and then execute the relevant action, regardless of which phrase the user chose to use at that time. Next, just on the top right, if we have a quick talk around the knowledge section. So combined with things such as the Q&A cognitive service, you can very quickly build a bot that will answer questions that a user may pose to it. So this can make use of structured data such as HTML. You can give the Q&A maker a link to an FAQ page on your website. It will actually build up a bank of questions and answers and the language understanding model needed to actually interpret user input. That language understanding model can get smarter, through use as well. It'll continually be learning.
Yeah, I think one of the things I find really interesting about the Q&A maker service is the fact that you could take a raw PDF document that was probably created 20 years ago, and you could have it uploaded to the service, and it would intelligently determine the headings and then the subheadings of the document based on how bold the text is. And then it's able to structure this in a way that it's able to serve users with very specific queries to get access to some information. So there's no need to have to flip through to page 148, section 5 and 2, but with just a simple question, the bot is able to take this existing data to serve a response to the user.
Yeah.
I think that's
it's pretty amazing to see all those services, the Vision API to scan those documents, language understanding, seeing those all come together to do something like that's pretty amazing, and we'll definitely cover that in a future video. So just moving on to the skills now, this is probably the last part we're going to cover on this slide. You can think of a skill almost as a self-contained bot that performs a specific set of reusable actions. So I like to think of it as similar to how we as humans tend to have unique skills and expertise. Bots can too. So you may actually end up developing multiple bot skills and then connect them together to form almost like a super team of bots. And one really simple example is you could build a skill that handles sort of customer retention. It's designed to be able to take a customer who wants to leave your company and persuade them to stay. It may have access, to offers available to that user, and then a general customer service web chat bot, which would be considered the root bot. When they sort of detect that a user is a bit disgruntled or they want to leave the service, they could actually call on the expertise of that bot and try to retain the customer. And just another sort of, maybe it's a bit more of a geeky kind of example, is if you think of Tony Stark's assistant in Iron Man, rather than that being sort of a single assistant that can do everything, if that was built on the bot framework, you'd have sort of like, a weapons expert skill, a medic skill, a tactics skill, and, the central bot would actually call out to the expertise via those skills. And you can see some of the out-of-the-box skills that they provide there. So things such as email, calendar, and tasks. These do allow you to sort of quickly integrate. If you had your own enterprise bot, you want to integrate with Office 365 to add appointments to a calendar, rather than coding that from scratch, you could call that built-in calendar skill. At the moment, it is focused on 365, but Microsoft do state that they are expanding the mail and calendar to include Google APIs soon as well. They are currently in the works. And obviously skills there, as I said, they're kind of like a self-contained bot, which a user can interact with, directly, or can be accessed via another bot. And this is where you're going to create your custom skills that interact with your internal systems.
All right, so yeah, I think this is like a very interesting, overview of all the different possibilities. And it's interesting to know that there's no one way to do this. This can be implemented in many different ways. It could be for an organization to have a bot that's able to get summary of sales report for the first quarter, and then the bot would intelligently go compute this and return the response back. Which would make it easier than having to choose different drop-down filters from an application. So this would take us on to the next screen, which I think I skipped. Yeah, which would help us have just an insight into what the overview of the architecture of a bot looks like. So here we have, a client, which could be a mobile app or one of the other devices that Dan just mentioned early on, and we have the Azure bot service, which is basically an API project that's secured, deployed on Microsoft Azure. And then this service is able to communicate with other third-party services, depending on what the function of the bot is, and get some response back to the user. And for most of the development you would do, it's more or less like building an API project, but there's special libraries that help to handle the communication between the users and manage all the states and the different things that is needed to personalize the service. So before we go into the development, the tools we would need to build a bot using .NET, using the Microsoft Bot Framework, are Visual Studio. In order to build on the version 4 of the framework, it's recommended that you use Visual Studio 2017 forward, and definitely you would need to also install the Bot Framework SDK. And there are Visual Studio templates, which you also need to install. These are basically boilerplate templates you could use to kick off a project with some very minimal code that would help to guide your learning or development process as you go on. And there's an interesting tool called the Visual Composer. This helps you to start creating a bot without writing a line of code. And it's very friendly in such a way that you're able to compose the different sections and branches and connections of conversations in your bots. And after you have done some work here, it's easy to download the source codes of the project and continue your development, writing actual code if you wish to do so. And then there's the bot emulator, which is basically a client that you would use to test your bots during development. Most bots end up getting deployed to either Cortana or Alexa, or could have Microsoft Teams as a channel. But then while you're developing, you would need a way to test, and then the bot emulator is the way you will be able to do this.
I think the Visual Composer is definitely something that people should take a look at, because I know it was one of the complaints from earlier versions of the framework was there was no visual tooling to actually build bots. It's great for if you want to get a demo up and running really quickly to do something internally. I just love that you can then, as you say, take the code and continue with that and do full development on it.
Yeah, I think the whole idea is just to make this as easy as possible so developers can focus on solving business problems instead of having to get into becoming a deep learning expert. So these are some general concepts about bots. Just before we take a look at some code, it would be important to highlight some of this. So there's something called an activity, which basically represents some type of information that is passed over between one party and the other in a conversation. And there are different types of activities that I would also showcase in the next screen. And a turn is basically the actual movement of information. Think of it like the packaged information that would include the message and then the receiver and then the sender. And then the turn context is actually it's like the middleware that actually manages the sending and receiving of requests. And then this just makes it much easier from the code development side, which we would get into more details on in the next couple of slides. So these are 15 different activity types that we have currently in the version 4 of the bot framework. And as we can see, there's more things than the actual message that moves between the user and the bot, or vice versa. And in this case, we have, things like the message itself. And then when a message is deleted, there's also some form of notification that is sent over to your project, and you're able to make the necessary decision. One popular, the typing is also a type of activity, which is something I think some of us would be familiar with. When you use Teams, you would have some feedback that lets you know the other user is typing. I would mostly be focusing on just a couple of this in the code showcase we would do, but this is just to give you some insights that there's lots of different activities you could gain access to using the bot framework. So I'm just going to mention some terms that we would not be covering in this project, but just to highlight how useful they can be. So there's the states, which basically helps you to manage states for your bots, because at the end of the day, your bots would actually need to be able to remember certain things in a conversation. Communicating with a bot is more like filling a form and signing up to join a website or a secured application, but there's need to have some context after having some conversation or after getting some data from you. And that's what the state really does. It helps you manage how that information is saved. And it could either be in a temporary memory location or a more persistent data store. And authentication, bots also need security. So there's ways to implement open authentication protocols to secure your application. And then we have dialogues, which are basically ways of managing more complex conversations. And the idea is basically to be able to carefully know which things you have answered and transit you from one conversation to the other based on the progress you have made while communicating with the bot.
I think one quick example of using state sort of enhance the user experience, a real world example that a lot of us would have experienced is if you were to ask, say, Google Assistant, a simple question, who was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, it would obviously say about Boris Johnson. But then if you want to find out how old he was, rather than saying, how old is Boris Johnson, you can just reply with, how old is he? And that state allows the Google Assistant to track the fact that you're still talking about Boris Johnson. You can make a judgment call and say, this person probably wants to know the age of Boris Johnson. So that's just a nicer user experience than having to make a new statement every time you want some information.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And at the end of the day, I think user experience is key. There's been people have had very terrible experiences with bots, and that's why for most people who have a bad experience with a bot the first time, it's very hard to trust it subsequently. So that's why using things like the states to be able to understand what the user has and improve the experience in some way is very useful. And we have Luis. I mean, I won't say much about this because Dan, I mean, talked about it early on. It's basically a way to have your bot help understand like some different ways of saying the same thing and provide strongly typed outputs that your code can understand, and you can make the right decisions based on that. And then also we would definitely need to have a bot published. So Dan, you want to?
Yeah, it's obviously, as many of us will know, it's all well and good developing an amazing new application or a new bot, but if it's not published somewhere that people can access it, then it's useless really. So you would publish your bot to the Microsoft bot service on Azure. Once it's there, this is where you would then integrate with numerous channels, which in most cases is as simple as pasting in, the app secret and key from, the third-party service. When it comes to actually building and testing your bot, there's no need to keep deploying back to the Azure service just to check a small change. So the bot emulator actually uses a tool called ngrok or ngrok to create a secure tunnel to the locally hosted API on your machine. This is also really useful for testing webhooks with Microsoft Teams and things like that. So David's now going to walk us through creating, testing, and publishing a very simple echobot project that can respond to both text and speech input. We're going to show you the text input in the emulator, and then we're going to show a speech interaction via the Cortana virtual assistant. And just to set expectations, an echobot will simply respond with what it heard the user say. We will be running future sessions that are going to go into a lot more detail, and we'll start to connect to the cognitive services. But for now, we just want to give a really simple example of how you can get up and running and some very basic concepts. So I'll hand it over to David to run us through that.
All right, thank you, Dan. So I have Visual Studio up on my screen. Dan, can you confirm if you can see?
Yeah, that's going through clear.
Yep. All right, so basically, like I've mentioned before, Bot project is mostly an API project, and I will show that to us. But the core thing we want to do here is just see how quickly we can create a project using one of the templates and do some bit of like a change in the default code we have, and try to do some publish for that and see what the output looks like. So I would hit the create a new project button, and we would find out here that I have templates for the bot AI bot in this dropdown, which I would only have when I have the SDK installed, and I also have the Visual Studio templates that I mentioned early on. So we have 3 different types of bot templates included here, and the first one I will talk about is the echobot. It's the core bot. And the core bot is mostly, it's a more detailed template. It includes a lot of additional code, which would help you understand how you could implement Luis in a custom way, which is a language understanding service. And also like things like being able to say, book me a flight from London to Manchester, for instance. Luis is able to get what London is, what Manchester is, and then get you some response or book the ticket for you based on that. So, and there's also a lot like more into like implementation of dialogues, and some of the things I mentioned we may not necessarily cover here today. And we also have like an empty bot template, and this is did not mean to click that. So yeah, so we have an empty bot. And an empty bot basically has a blank, it's basically a blank project that, you could use to start up your project if you know exactly what you're doing and don't need any of the samples. And we have the echobot, which is something in between. The echobot basically takes in inputs and then receives the text from the user and immediately packages the same text and sends it back to the user. So that's why it's called an echobot. So whatever text you give in, it's going to put that back to you, instantly. And I'm going to start a new project using the .NET Core 3.1, which is the latest, which is a more recent version of .NET Core. And the name of my project, I would leave it as a default and hit the create button. And once the project comes up, we would find out that it's no different from most of your API projects for people who are familiar with development using ASP.NET Core. And yes, we have just some simple code here. I would view this in the browser so we can see what this looks like, and then come back to explain a couple of things that make this work. And while that, is coming up, I would show us the bot emulator, which is what I mentioned early on. You need to use this to test your bot during development, so you don't have to wait until you have it deployed to like Microsoft Azure, or when you have it ready to use in Microsoft Teams. So the bot emulator works just like a chat client, and you can open a new bot by hitting this button and providing the URL of your bot. And yeah, so our bot is ready, and this is just a fancy page for to show you that the service is running. And the very important value we need here is the endpoint of the bot, which is shown here. And we need this to connect to the bot from any of the clients we are working with. So I would right click and copy this and come over to the bot emulator and input that URL here. So this would allow me to connect to the bot, and then I can interact with it as a client. And these fields would need to be filled if your bot is published to Azure already. And this is basically to provide some form of security over your bot, which is something that is taken care of by the Azure bot service. So I would hit the connect button, and yeah, and I'm connected to the bot. And I have, so this is the chat window, and this is just like every other instant messaging tool that we might be familiar with. So there's a hello and welcome message, and I'm just going to enter the text, hello world. And I get a response back, and it just says echo hello world. And that's simply how, this bot project works. So I'm going to go back to the code and show us what makes this possible. And back to here. So here we have, in our controllers, we have the bot controller. And we can see that the API.messages endpoint is the same one that we copied and pasted. So this is really the endpoint we're hitting. And we have just one method here, which is what receives and sends messages for a bot. And we have like two different injected objects here. One is the adapter, and another one is the bot. And we pass in the bot into like a method here that is called process async. And what the adapter does here is basically take care of all the complex work involved in receiving the response, processing it, and then sending the response back to the user. So there's a lot of middleware code that helps us to take care of a lot of complexity there. But what we need to take a look at here is the actual bot code, which is the brainwork of our bot, and is where we configure things like received messages and activities and turns that I talked about early on. And just like, most of us who are familiar with how dependency injection works, the iBot implementation is actually here in the echobot .cs file, which is in the bots folder. And here we have basically two implemented methods in this class. And one is the onMessage activity async. The other one is the onMembers added async. And there's a lot more. Like I listed a large, 15 different possible activities, and each of them almost have a way you can retrieve some, response or capture some event that happens when they are triggered. But in this case, we have onMessage activity, which is triggered when a message is received. And as we can see, there are two different parameters here. One is the turn context, and then the other one is the cancellation token. The turn context contains all the package of information that is coming in through the request or through the whatever the input method the user is using. And as we can see here, we're able to pull out the text coming from the user by saying turn context.activity.text. And what this simply does is it concatenates the word echo together with whatever input text comes in. And then we use a method in the turn context that is called send activity async to send a message back to the user. And we compose like a response using message factory.text, and the two parameters here are the same like reply text we have. This first one is for providing the like if it's a text output like a chat window, this is the text that will be displayed. And the parameter here represents the speak response, which would be if you're using like a platform like Cortana or Alexa, whatever you want the bot to read out is what you need to include here. And the cancellation token is basically a way you could, you would need that to know when the bot actually needs to be canceled. So, and just moving on to show us the on members added async. This basically is triggered when a user is added to the conversation. And it also has two parameters, the members added, the turn context, and the cancellation token. And what this does is it looks through the list of members and makes sure that the member is not the bot. And in this case, our bot is going to be the turn context.activity.recipient. And we just make sure that it's not our bot, and we send a welcome message to any user who is not the bot. And that is why I got the hello and welcome in the chat I tested.
It's worth just briefly calling out. You can see there the on member added async method takes a list of channel accounts. So you can see there where the bot framework is abstracting away the specific implementation details of the channel. So this could be coming from the emulator, it could be coming from Teams or Slack. It's just a very generic event, and you don't need to worry about that specific implementation. You just need to know that a member was added to the conversation, regardless of channel.
So I'm going to do a quick publish now. And I mean, thank you, Dan. Like that's just to prove how easy it is to like aggregate different channels and I mean, provide access to the same resource at the end of the day. So I'm just going to do a quick publish of our bot. And I have an already set up service on Azure that I'm going to show to us. And here I am going to select an existing user profile, an existing published profile, which is connected to the bot service I have set up on Azure. And here we go. So yeah, and then I'm going to publish this bot, and I will just quickly take us to Azure to take a look at what the bot service looks like from the Azure side. So this looks
David, I think we just need to use the web deploy version. I think we had an issue with the FTP.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, just selected that now. Thank you. So just to double check, self-contained, yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to initiate the publish now. And while I do that, I'm going to go over to, this is the Microsoft Azure portal. And I'm just going to dig through down to where the bot service we're publishing to now is hosted. And so I mean, definitely like the support for like configuring like how our bot connects to different channels that we mentioned early on. I mean, this is where we can find and configure that. And I mean, this screen is quite similar to what we saw when we were viewing the service after like creating the bot service locally. And we find that there's a test and web chat option here, which is just similar to what we have in the bot emulator. I'll click on the channels tab, and that's going to allow us to see the list of channels that our bot is currently connected to. And also I just show, okay, I have two issues here on my bot, but I guess this is just because, it's just because of the development, but yeah, I think this is running fine. So we have 4 channels already connected to this specific bot service. And we have more channels here, like Alexa, and I mean, a number of other options that we could easily connect our bot to with just a few clicks of, of the setup function here. And just to show us how the Cortana is configured, I will click on edit to show us some of the things that was imputed when it was being created. But yeah, it's so easy to connect our bot with different channels and instantly be able to provide input. And what we do in our bot service is basically to take that input and perform whatever type of operation we want to with the data that comes in. And yeah, and please, if you have any questions, remember to pop it in the chat window. But while we wait for our bot to get published.
If you just look on that channels page, one thing which I forgot to mention earlier was you saw the direct line was one of the channels, and so that's one of the premium channels. The other one is web chat. What the direct line API allows you to do is really deeply integrate your applications, whether it's a mobile app, a certain part of your interface on a device, such as a car, lets you integrate directly via a RESTful API call into your bot and send messages from anywhere that you may want to, without necessarily using one of those built-in channels that are available.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's basically like flexible for you to create like whatever you want. And like Dan mentioned early on, whether you're designing some IoT-based system that's similar to what Tony Stark used in Avengers, you could have your own custom, build system and have the bot connected to that. And then it's easy to have whatever, do whatever you want to do and then pass some output back to the user. So here we have the setup for Cortana channel. Every channel would have some piece of information you need to set up, but in this case, we have what's called an invocation name, which just represents what triggers my bot to respond in Cortana. So there's many things I could say to Cortana, like remind me of something, but in this case, if I want to trigger this app, I have to say the word superbot, and then anything I say after that is passed into the bot service, and then I'm able to get a response back after that happens. So, and this is so easy to set up that you could literally get this up and running in a few minutes. And at the end of the day, you just have to focus on solving problems within your organization. So yeah, I think our publish is still on, but will soon be complete. So yeah, it's also interesting to know beyond, besides Cortana, there's also Alexa, which is probably more popular for end users. In some parts of the world. So it's easy to also have your bot working in, your existing Alexa deployment.
I think just picking up on you can see there that Cortana actually sees your bot as a skill. So what we were going back to earlier, sort of saying a skill is a sort of specialized bot that performs a certain action. In this case, our echobot's not too fancy, but this could be, something that's doing something really complex, integrating with multiple systems within your organization. And Cortana really just sees it as another skill. Similarly, you could build your own assistant if you wanted that would call out to these individual skills.
All right, looks like echobot is ready and live on Azure. And as we can see, we see like something very similar to what we have when we viewed it locally. But I'm just going to quickly, before we have to wrap up the presentation, I would quickly launch Cortana on my device. And I have my Cortana account linked up with the current service we have here. And then I would say something to Cortana. I would trigger it using the superbot command and then say something and get some response back. So tell superbot, how are you?
Superbot said you are, how are you too?
So yeah, okay, this is actually still like showing a deployment I made early on, but that's just a response from, like a bot I actually deployed early on, which which gives the response like superbot said you are this too. And that's just to show us like how easy it is to have a bot deployed and implemented. But I think something must have gone wrong during my deployment because I have just the basic bot deployed here. yeah, I'm going to try to publish one more time. I think it should go through in just a few seconds this time, since I have a successful publish already. And I must have, I just need to confirm that oh yes, I didn't tick this. So yeah, I'm supposed to have removed additional files at destination. But the key point here is that bot, is able to like connect with my Cortana interface. And the same thing that I'm able to do from the bot emulator early on, I'm able to connect with it through the Cortana interface, and then provide some, form of input to my code, and then my code is able to package that and send that back to me. So so I could see if we can. So I think in subsequent like webinar series, we'll be able to explore bots in more details, and I think we'll be focusing on specific case studies where we can navigate through data, generate like charts. Probably represent like data between January and March of like sales figures for a fictitious company, and we can see how the bot responds for things like that for different organizations. But so far, we have a successful publish. So I'm just going to test the bot one more time, and I'm going to hit the listen button on my device again and say, "Tell Superbot, how are you?"
Echo, hey, tell Superbot, how are you?
Yeah, so it says Echo, hello.
Echo, hello.
Okay, so the I said early on also went as part of that, but that's just to show like how we have, a simple example of like the echo goes back here, and I could change this to Superbot, just the final item here. Superbot thinks you are, and then I'm going to concatenate the text and say 2. And then I'm just going to save this and publish. So this should also just take a few seconds since I have done a publish early on, and we would see what difference it makes when we hit Cortana up this time. And mostly we get, a text that says, Superbot says you are, and then whatever I say to it, and then say 2. So I would, try to avoid saying something very nasty, so I don't get a nasty response back. So yeah, this is the last bit before we wrap up the demo for today. And subsequently, like things like IoT would be good to explore the business case, and also like have some more interesting demo that we could discuss in the next couple of webinars.
Yeah, this was really just designed. It's a little taster, dipping the toes in the water. We've got numerous sessions planned. Details of those will follow shortly for those that are interested in learning more.
So here I'm going to say, tell Superbot you are not smart.
Superbot thinks you are. You are not smart too.
So there we have it. So that's just based on the input text I've provided here. And so depending on what your use case is in your organization, you would be able to take in some input text. You could process and do whatever you want to do, and then package some output and send that back to the user. So I'm just going to hand over to Chris, who's going to wrap up and this webinar series. And Chris.
Thanks very much, David. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So thanks for your time this evening, everyone. I hope you found it useful. Apologies that my video seems to be a bit poor. I think Regis have decided to save some money on their internet connection during the lockdown, which they obviously haven't started paying again yet. So apologies for that. If you didn't know much about bot technology before, then hopefully it's inspired you to think about some potential use cases in your organization. If it has, we'd love to hear about them. So connect with us on any of our social channels, etc., or directly through the website or email. And if any questions pop into your head over the next few weeks or days, just get in touch. We'd love to hear more from you about what you're planning and whether or not you're going to be implementing some bots. So we're going to send out the link to the recording in the next few days or so. We'll also include a link to a really short survey just to get some feedback, just so we can improve the session. So if you know anybody who wants to, who'd be interested in looking at the webinar recording, please pass that on. So we're going to be running our next webinar on July the 21st at 7 p.m. So we'll be discussing another enterprise technology topic, possibly some more on bots. It seems to be quite popular, but we'll publish that in the next few days. And you're already all registered for that session. So just look out for the reminder emails that'll come out. And once again, thanks very much, and hope to see you all soon. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.